Okay, today's video is the product of over 24 interviews, dozens of hours of work, and significant scripting in order to accurately and completely expose a corrupt company in video games. That company, which may come as no surprise to most, is Quantic Lab. And the reason for this video is quite simple. Quantic Lab appears to be an abusive work environment with fraudulent and illegal practices, while their net total impact on the gaming world around them is severely negative. For context, this has been a three-part story. It all began with an anonymous whistleblower who now goes by the name Archangel. This whistleblower contacted me with extensive internal documentation to support their identity and claims, while alleging that Quantic Lab had had a detrimental impact on the development cycle of Cyberpunk 2077, but more importantly, was lying to their personal clients about project team size and implementing oppressive quotas for their workers, which would hinder productivity. That story exploded across mainstream gaming media. The angle of Cyberpunk 2077 specifically became hyper-focused, and the narrative took shape that this was either a catch-all explanation about why that particular game failed, or an attempt at dodging blame. Various media outlets began to search for statements, CD Projekt Red devs began to allegedly refute the claims, but all of this began to lose sight of what should be the real story here. I don't care if Cyberpunk developers want to scoff at the initial claims. I don't care what they have to say for themselves with regards to how a product as embarrassingly pathetic and broken as Cyberpunk actually gets released onto the mainstream market. They are basically saying, haha, lol, that's so wrong. We definitely knew how broken it was, but released it anyway. Great job, guys. Do you want a cookie for that? Anyway, what I really care about is what's been happening inside Quantic Lab, because that is the real story. My gut told me there was something bigger beneath the surface, and that is precisely what has been found. After my initial coverage that contained whistleblower testimony that Quantic Lab has been lying to clients about team size, which is a serious problem, the CEO of Quantic released a statement. Just to clarify, this is Quantic Lab, a Romanian-based outsourced quality assurance company, not Quantic Dream, an entirely separate development studio. That official statement contains basically nothing. The CEO fixates on the idea that I got some tidbits wrong about the company's initial history, that I don't fully understand the process of outsourced quality assurance, and that ultimately Cyberpunk failed for reasons other than them, because a lot of outsourced QA teams were actually involved. Tell you what, in the interest of fairness here, I'll grant all three of these positions. It's entirely possible that I got some small things wrong about their corporate history. It's entirely possible that I did not know, at the time, as much about quality assurance as I could have. And it's also probably true that Quantic is not the primary reason why Cyberpunk 2077 failed, though it did unequivocally and undeniably contribute to that. That statement, if we award them all areas of accuracy in their rebuttal, says nothing to deny allegations about workplace abuse. It says nothing to deny allegations of fraudulent or illegal practices. And today, starting with Quantic Lab, I want to look at the industry of outsourced quality assurance because it's an area that mistreats workers, produces inferior results than it could, and damages the potential of mainstream gaming itself. Let's begin with further coverage. My initial video was based on one primary whistleblower. That whistleblower has said that they will now forward documents to other sources in order to prove their identity if requested, but is not going to have an active role with them or take interviews. Instead, we will start by looking to Romanian news outlets who have begun to pick up and publish testimonials after the fact. First is a Romanian labor market newsletter called Hacking Working Podcast. Everything I discuss will be linked down below just for reference. This newsletter describes an environment where workers are routinely mistreated, but the focal point is a series of testimonials that were brought forward by staff members. Keep in mind, this page is translated via Google, aka imperfect, but I'm still working directly with the original source, Archangel, who translated the key testimony for me in a much more refined way and helped to verify and cross-reference all of these claims. Particularly damning are the statements from a former employee named Vlad. Vlad details how Quantic Lab decided to implement a new system called Rocket Chat, but Rocket Chat was a strictly monitored messaging system where the company itself would have full vision and authority over everything. In protest, he changed his avatar to the Korean flag, the North Korean flag, and started calling his friends comrade as a protest of this authoritarian surveillance. Over the next week, Vlad was bounced between meetings and effectively bullied by management into resigning. His coworkers went on to verify that he was forced into resignation, and all because he had made slight disagreements about the total surveillance protocol of worker communications. For our purposes today, try to remember specific key themes, the first of which is employees being forced to resign. Next is a source who claims, quote, "Personally, I was made to lie in reports to clients that there were X testers per project, when in fact there were a much smaller number. Some even worked on 3 to 4 projects, and on some days as a team lead, I was alone on the project and logged bugs with multiple database accounts." End quote. The second specific theme here, as a result of that quote, is understaffed but lying to clients about team size. Yet another ex-employee of Quantic Lab came forward, this time discussing localization. All of these have further corroboration from my own sources, so keep that in mind. And from their testimony, there are even more problems. This is where we find issue number 3, which is false representations of capability and security issues. According to this employee, Quantic Lab outsources the work that was already outsourced to them. When vying for contracts, Quantic would lie about native language speakers. They would pretend that they had native speakers on staff of any given language, when in reality they didn't. After securing the contract, they would then outsource the work from their own company to yet another company, and this source also corroborated the idea that they would often have less than 1/3 of the actual workers for a given project that was advertised, after lying to their clients about team size. This particular source also went on to say how lead testers were often completely inexperienced, which would create a whole new set of problems, and outlined that security was an issue because third parties or freelancers were being advertised as in-house workers, which meant leaks became a considerably more likely prospect. Yet another testimonial corroborated the idea that the company lies about native language speakers, and for more uncommon languages, they will yet again send full video content, dialogue, and other material to third parties, not in-house, which means that the risk of a client non-disclosure being violated rises dramatically. This particular source went on to describe toxic and sexist working conditions, with an emphasis on hiring those with little experience, plus an outline of how oppressive the worker-signed non-disclosure had become as the company tried to insulate itself from liability. The testimony continues, containing allegations that night shift workers were promised meal vouchers but never got them. Salaries were often just late, unexplained, while the company shifted blame to their clients, saying that they themselves had not been paid, so it's normal. And it became clear that the non-disclosure policies that workers were being given routinely were a way to protect the company from its own employees, not a way to protect employees or clients. Next up is Vice Romania, who published a scathing article in follow-up, which cited comments from my own video, but underlines precisely how bad the internal working environment has become. This relied less on specific sources and more on general news up to this point, but the trend is becoming clear. Quantic Lab has made every effort to suppress the potential for criticism. They lock their workers inside an iron box of information secrecy and then abuse them, but when the box begins to break, all bets are off. This brings us to my own information, and again, dozens of interviews ranging from 30 minutes to 4+ hours in length with both current and former Quantic Lab employees, plus others in the field, which leads me to making this video. Nearly all of the sources I spoke with asked specifically for anonymity, some because their non-disclosure has not yet expired, others because they still work there, and even more because they work in a somewhat related field now and do not wish to be ostracized from their own current job for whistleblowing against corporate malpractice. First up is a source that I will simply call Alex. Alex was a worker at Quantic Lab almost a decade ago. When joining, he was chosen specifically because he spoke English. After about 1 week of training, he was dropped into an active project, and that is when he realized how truly dysfunctional the company was. Alex described to me in great detail how, as far back as 2012 and 2013, there was an oppressive atmosphere of quantity over quality. Quantic Lab would, in his own words, prefer 10 bugs that are visual and useless, easy might be a better word there, as opposed to 1 bug that is complex and game-breaking. There was a sense of disappointment if a tester uncovered something major, and the prevailing atmosphere was that when discovering key or large issues, testers were wasting everyone's time, and should, instead, be pumping up the numbers. Alex also went into great detail about the division of labor at Quantic Lab and described a format of 3 divisions. First is console compliance testing. This is where employees remain the longest, since there is a rigorous set of parameters given by the publishers, Microsoft and Sony. Compliance testing is a very common thing for console releases. Alex relayed to me that it is not uncommon to find workers who stayed in that particular role for many years, but when shifting departments to either mobile devices or major PC game testing, that is where things fell apart. Alex alleged that during his time at the company, the owner and CEO opened a U-Test account. For those that don't know, U-Test is a mobile device testing website where you can earn some cash for testing applications. Once he had his personal account, he retasked the entire mobile department of Quantic Lab to work under his personal screen name on that third-party application testing website, thus using company time and company salaries to earn himself income on their labor on a personal account, and a few months later, he bought himself a luxury car with the funds, and bragged about it. Alex went on to discuss a major MMO project where a team of 30 testers was filled almost completely by hiring brand new employees, and that they simply didn't have enough equipment even for those employees to use, so they rotated in shifts, which meant that some team members were being completely overworked at strange hours of the night, and the overall productivity radically decreased. When something inevitably went wrong with a major contract, Alex was forced to leave. The company began pressuring senior team members to quit, and eventually Alex was made to sign what are called exit papers, which means he technically quit, but did so under duress with coercion. This is where I learned about what is probably a core issue at Quantic Lab, and that is the grace period. Romanian labor laws are not the same as the United States. In Romania, there is what's called a grace period, where you can either be fired without cause or quit without notice. That grace period is 3 months long, and if you make it through that 3-month-long period, you must give notice before you quit or provide cause on the side of the employer. You have to provide cause for termination when you get rid of someone. Quantic Lab, according to numerous sources that I spoke with, as well as testimony from the previous labor newsletter, does not care in the slightest about this, even though it is a law in Romania. One source I spoke with, I'll call him Thomas, detailed how both he and his friend were forced out so that the company could hire fresh workers with less pay. There was even an example given of an employee being forced to sign exit papers after the grace period had ended, thus illegally firing them or illegally forcing them to quit, and then forcing them to leave the building before they had even collected all of their personal belongings. According to Thomas, who gave me lengthy testimony on the subject, a specific example of lying to clients was within a project called Wreckfest, where Quantic Lab did not have even remotely close to the number of workers that they promised, and instead decided to outsource a portion of the work to India. What's worse, he then describes a new issue. Quantic Lab allegedly asked employees to give them money back after being paid. Why on earth would they do this? It sounds bizarre, I know, but let me explain. Romanian labor laws, if I have the percentages wrong, please let me know in the comments down below, but Romanian labor laws require that workers be given between 50% and 75% additional pay during overtime work. On holidays, that requirement increases to 100%. But at Quantic Lab, according to my source, they were demanding money back from employees after they worked their overtime without negotiating the policy with them first. Furthermore, discussing your salary would be cause for termination. The system relied on workers having no idea what each other were making, because the primary goal was to force senior employees out, hire brand new workers for a fraction of the cost, and continue to do this knowing that younger workers have little to no knowledge of labor rights, so they can be sat down later, coerced into signing exit papers, which means they technically quit even though they're being forced out, and the cycle can start all over again. I spoke with multiple additional sources corroborating the issue of localization. For those unaware, localization is when you translate and modify a game to be shipped and played in a different region with a different language. But having talked with people in that particular department, past and current, Quantic Lab would make frequent and inaccurate statements to clients about the number of native language speakers on staff, or even fluent language speakers that they had on staff. When a Chinese project came along, Quantic would say, "We have 4 native Chinese speakers," which is a big deal. But in reality, they had 1 or 2. And if they had 2, only one of them was actually native. The other simply knew some Chinese. Keep in mind, when you're translating or localizing a video game, it's very, very important to have a comprehensive understanding of the native language. Like, you really need this level of detail to make it a good game. Advertising that you have that while you don't have that is probably a big deal. What's worse, on multiple localization contracts, testers were forced to take this is what they were devolved into doing. They were forced to take screenshots of the game dialogue and go to outside third-party translation websites just to know what they were doing on the quest, what they should do for the objective. They had zero knowledge of the language, and yet Quantic Lab was translating and localizing the game while forcing them to effectively do their work and testing through shit-tier translation algorithms on third-party websites, because they just didn't have the experience or qualifications. According to another worker, I'll call them Duke, there were constantly 5, 10, even 15 brand new hires on any project because many of the employees that they picked up would quit within the span of just a couple of weeks. Totally inexperienced workers were being given crucial company tasks, and even internal conversations would acknowledge, on the topic of Cyberpunk 2077 specifically, yeah, we really fucked this one up. Not because they had a choice, not because they wanted to, but because the corporate governance at Quantic Lab is allegedly so bad that quality work is almost completely stifled. Summarizing the testimony I was given, Quantic Lab operates a working environment where there is just too much pressure. little to no honesty with clients on actual team size or qualifications, incredible employee turnover and lack of experience, lack of security by outsourcing what is already outsourced to them to other freelancers, and then providing them with video and audio and text and everything that's probably violating non-disclosure. Anyway, aggressive and possibly illegal tactics to force senior employees out, deceptive overtime pay practices, dishonest pretenses to secure contracts, such as, but not limited to, hiring brand new staff to puff up their team size beforehand and get more money before signing, or lying about native language speakers in localization, and all of this combined with aggressive non-disclosure agreements, surveillance, employee monitoring, and more, contributes to a dysfunctional workflow that is detrimental to nearly every single project that they are given. I have no doubt at all in my mind that they will look into the prospect of legal action against me personally for publishing this. I am 100% ready. I do not have any confidential documents in my possession. I was given access, but I did not hold on to nor distribute any of them. I have a healthy community behind me, and I am ready to stand up to the corporate malpractice of an abusive company. No doubt in my mind that this is one of those battles that come along every once in a while that I should and will choose. However, that's not the entire point of the video. As I explored this topic, I learned a great deal about the general outsourced QA industry, and oddly enough, it's not unilaterally similar. Video game QA, at least in terms of outsourced company options, is in a terrible place, but not all QA industries suffer from this. In my interviews, I spoke with people who work both in-house and externally for EA, Bethesda, Ubisoft, and Activision, and what I found was troubling. Quantic Lab is not alone. While I do believe it's one of the more severe examples in the industry, the idea of outsourced quality assurance operating like a pufferfish of sorts is widespread. When attempting to secure contracts, more workers equals more bargaining power and more money. So multiple companies in the space will engage in an elastic hiring process where they onboard fresh hires and then downsize later because they can maximize the contract payout. This obviously leads to a lack of quality results because they simply bring these people in to jack up the contract value, but again, it is less severe than what we see with Quantic Lab. I have spoken with people inside Global Step, Keywords, a now defunct company called VMC, and an outsourced Indian giant called HCL. It is alleged that HCL will literally buy out smaller companies just to weasel their way back into contracts with Microsoft that they have been kicked out of. I've heard stories about a 30-man team at Global Step in particular that went through over 100 people in 2 years because no one stays long enough to even get proper experience. I have learned that the worker treatment in video game QA in particular is abysmal, and as a result of corporate malpractice, results are tainted. Bug quotas extend well beyond Quantic Lab, and while some companies wake up to the damage that they cause, some don't. Testers in video games who successfully leave the industry for, say, banking, according to another source that I talked with extensively, are getting triple the pay for a fraction of the work, with a smaller team size and better retention. That's not a result of the work alone being explicitly easier, that's a result of the workflow itself being legitimately functional. To everyone working in video game quality assurance, you deserve better than the standards that this industry currently has. Other industries are far better, and this one can be too. To everyone specifically in Romania subjected to the practices of a company like Quantic Lab, you deserve better as well. Outsourced QA is advertised to clients as a cost-effective option with greater results and superior workflow, just all around better. But reality could not be further from that claim. In the world of reality, outsourced QA is underpaid, underappreciated, mistreated, and sometimes abused. Inexperienced workers are funneled through a pipeline that does not care about them, and cares least of all, ironically, about the quality of what they produce. In the case of Quantic Lab, they receive outsourced work and then allegedly outsource it again, breaking all pretense of security and quality, because their corporate environment has become so toxic it can barely function. For others, maybe it's not so bad, not quite so bad. In-house QA, from my sources in particular, is far less volatile and mismanaged, but radically underpaid still, and thus talented hires who the company could very much use and probably should retain will leave quickly without a second thought. I'm sure that there are companies out there doing it right, but the industry standard, that I have seen at least, after dozens of interviews, hours of work, and extensive research, is rock bottom even when compared to other similar fields. Quality assurance and quality control are incredibly important for video games, but right now it is treated by corporate management as a cash grab joke. It's unfair to workers, it's unfair to clients and publishers, and lastly, it's unfair to customers who ultimately buy the products. Quantic Lab in particular seems to be one of the greatest offenders in all this, and I'm sure that more information will come out. I'm sure that more articles may be written. Whatever it is, more people may come forward with their experience, which I encourage. But yeah, that's it. I hope that something can change, but that remains to be seen. If you want to support me, my work, or the channel in general, please check out the links down below. I'll continue to look at this story, but for the near future, coverage may shift back to other topics. And I want to say thank you to everyone I spoke with who had the courage to come forward. Maybe we can spur change. I'm not sure. I hope so. That's it. I'll keep the outro short. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.